All right. Elliott Parker is an entrepreneur, investor, advisor, and author with a background in corporate innovation and venture building. He earned a degree in finance from Brigham Young University and an MBA from UCLA Anderson School of Management. Parker formerly worked at InnoSight, a firm created by Clayton Christensen, in which he helped to tackle problems and create value in the business landscape amongst some of the greatest minds. Elliot is the founder and CEO of High Alpha Innovation, a venture builder that partners with corporations, universities, and entrepreneurs to co create startups that solve compelling problems. The Illusion of Innovation is this book that he's written that I think is transformational. The Illusion of Innovation, Escape Efficiency and Capture Radical Progress, is a book that highlights the opportunity for scaled organizations to unlock transformation through rapid experimentation. This book explains why meaningful innovations naturally emerge from deliberate inefficiency and how large corporations can harness the power of small teams. With us today, we have Elliot ready to go, ready to rock. We have a bunch of questions that have been sent his way, and we're going to dive right into it. Elliot, you're in a community of innovators here in the digital age, and tons of folks are going to join us over the next hour or two, even the 6 hours that we're live here as a session. Is there anything that you want to say to them before we get going? And also, so cool to have you here, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Yeah, so great to be here. Nice to be in the space with all you and look forward to the discussion today. It'll be fun.
I agree. I think it's going to be tons of fun. Thanks again for joining us, folks who are in the audience. If you have some questions along the way for Elliot, please do me a favor. Put them in the bottom right hand corner or DM them to Cash Money or Mattia. We're going to kind of vet some questions and maybe take a couple at the end. Let you guys come on up and make this two-way podcast work the way it should. So you guys will get an opportunity to ask some questions to Elliot firsthand at the end of the discussion. Elliot, I'm going to open it up and just get going. I want to let innovators know that the link to your book is in the Jumbotron. If they want to go ahead and get the hard copy, we put the link to that. Folks who are more of an audiobook speed, that is available on Spotify, and we put the link to that there as well. So let's jump right into it. Elliot, at the beginning of the book, you state that there's more truth outside business than within it, and that inspiration comes from unexpected places, end quote. Where was the inspiration for writing this book, and did it come from outside of business?
Huh. Funny, if yes, it did. And a funny quick anecdote on the audiobook, I actually recorded it in Nashville, Tennessee, in the studio where Taylor Swift recorded her first album.
No
So
kidding.
she and I have that in common. And while I was reading the book, Taylor Swift was looking down at me from a poster on the wall, which was lots of fun. But yeah, the idea for this book came from the sense that I think a lot of people have, myself included, that are large institutions, whether they be corporations or governments or universities or anything, they just seem less capable than they once were. I had a lot of really good examples of this, scary examples of this. Think of like um, look at the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is a fantastic example. The bridge, I think, when it was originally built back in the 1930s, if I remember right, took a handful of years. Didn't cost very much money in today's dollars. A few years ago, they decided to put a safety net on the outside of the bridge, and I think that safety net cost about two-thirds of the cost of the original bridge and
My
took longer
goodness.
to install than to build the original bridge. There are lots of examples like that, right? And so the question is, what has happened? Why are and look at our corporations too, these big companies, they just seem more likely to get stuck in corporate goo, less able to do things, to move, to make decisions, to innovate in the face of opportunity or challenge than they once were.
Mm.
And that's a problem. We need them to be successful.
And so you realized firsthand that things were slowing down in places that maybe they should have had the resources and tools to speed up, but that they weren't. And you felt like this was worth digging into. So it definitely sounds like some of the inspiration and insights of this book, were outside of business and looking at the world and how it was slowing down a bit. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and look at companies in particular. Right now, there's more money on corporate balance sheets than ever before, about $7 trillion. So corporations are making more money than they ever have. And at the same time, the lifespans of those companies is shrinking. So they're making more money and they're also going out of business faster. And
Wow.
that is an interesting paradox. Why? What's going on? You'd think if they're making more money, they'd be more enduring and more resilient. They're not. This opens up all kinds of opportunities, of course, for entrepreneurs to do things, but it's helpful to understand what's going on and what to do about it, whether you're inside a big company or as an entrepreneur or innovator trying to do something.
So, where did you first notice this concept that you depict in the book of innovation theater and ultimately the illusion of innovation? Where did you first smell it out? Where did you first see it? And you were like, okay, I'm starting to understand how this is not working, so to say.
Yeah, I remember early in my career, this goes back 20 plus years, I was part of a small corporate venture capital team. So working inside a big company at the time, my career has gone back and forth between startups and big companies. And at the time, we were part of an innovation team and corporate venture capital team. Our job was to invest in startups on behalf of the corporation. And if we couldn't find startups that matched our thesis, we would build and create companies from scratch inside the corporation. And it got really hard to do. Meaning in the beginning, everyone was optimistic. We had big dreams about the wild things we were going to
Sure.
go pursue and invest in. And over time, what happened was anytime we wanted to make an investment or build something new, we had to go speak with the CFO over in Switzerland and get permission. And at some point, that we realized the corporation just wasn't taking any action. We were presenting all kinds of ideas. We could not get anything to move through the system, and in fact, recommended in the end that if they weren't going to do it, that they ought to shut the team down. We all left and went
Sure.
and did other things. And so there's a lot of that going on inside of big companies, small companies too, by the way. But as big companies scale and in fact, the irony is that as they become better run, they're more optimized for profitability and safety and predictability. They're less likely to do the types of things, to make the mistakes that are required if you're going to learn and do new innovative things.
And you point out in the book that then this creates an innovation crisis, to kind of use your quote there. How bad is this excuse me, innovation crisis right now, Elliot? And like, how bad is the crisis if people were to try to understand it?
Well, we're in the midst of it. It's an amazing time to be alive. Let me state that up front. I
Amen.
am
Yeah.
super optimistic. And there's actually more innovation going on around us than ever before. And there's some really interesting reasons why that pace should continue to pick up and increase. Not the actual amount of innovation that will increase, that will, but the rate of increase will. The rate of innovation will continue to increase exponentially. It's an amazing time to be alive. The paradox is that our large institutions are less involved and less capable of doing those things than they used to be. And that is a problem because as people, we collaborate sometimes in large groups to get things done. Corporations turn out to be a fantastic way that we do that. The technology that we're talking through right now is brought to us by corporations, by people getting together in massive
Right.
groups and coordinating their efforts to do amazing things. And there's certain types of problems that corporations are really well suited to address. If corporations are failing to address those things, humanity suffers, actually.
Yes.
And we need them to be better at it.
In chapter one, you say capital efficiency is self-imposed tyranny. And you start referring to the capitalist dilemma in some sense, which would make sense to where we are and what you've just explained. The quote that you gave, capital efficiency is self-imposed tyranny, really caught me by storm. Can you explain why it's become tyrannical on corporations, that they've imposed this level of efficiency, for to help some of us understand what that looks like?
Yeah, it impacts all of us. So this is an idea when I used to work with Clayton Christensen, who hopefully many of you in the space will know of. Clay came up with the idea of the innovator's dilemma, developed the theory of disruptive innovation. An amazing, incredible thinker and human. Passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, too early. But he was an amazing guy. And at the end of his life, he was working on this idea of what he called the capitalist dilemma. And the idea of the capitalist dilemma is that as companies seek to optimize for profitability, for cash flow, what happens is they become more brittle, less resilient, more likely to fail. And we saw some really compelling examples of this during the COVID crisis. You saw companies that ran these incredibly efficient supply chains, for example, all over the globe, every part being delivered right on time, amazing accomplishments. You think about these supply chains, I mean, really miraculous, almost just next level
Yeah.
evidence of human ingenuity, tens of thousands of people over decades working on these things to optimize them. Super capital efficient, didn't waste any money, didn't make any mistakes. And then a crisis like COVID comes, one part of the system breaks, and the whole thing comes crashing down. So what was capital efficient in the near term turned out to not be capital efficient in the long run. And this is the tyranny. It's the fact that these amazing institutions that we've built become really fragile as they optimize for profitability. And we need them to be more resilient. As long as they're producing societal surplus, we want them to continue to do that, to do it successfully. We don't want them failing. And it's that focus on efficiency, that focus on profit generation in the near term that is at the root of the issue.
And ultimately what's led them to accrue so much on their balance sheets over time, but yet we still have this feeling that capital is scarce, that maybe even everybody in this room, or a lot of folks in this room can feel, or have loved ones who can feel, and that we feel in the business world. How do we have so much money on the balance sheet in aggregate in the corporate scene, but still have a culture that treats it scarce? How did we get
Yeah.
here?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And I think all of us, like, many times myself, it doesn't feel like capital is abundant. Like, I wish I had some more of it for sure.
Yeah.
But when you look at corporations, like we were saying earlier, more money on corporate balance sheets than ever before, and the companies are also going out of business faster. And that is a sign, I think that's evidence that we've gotten really good at managing our large companies, better than we've ever been. Think of the tens of thousands, hundreds of millions of people who have gotten MBAs in the last 100 years, all the research that's gone into how to manage organizations. We've gotten a lot smarter about how to run companies. We've just optimized them, I think, for the wrong things. We're very, very good at running companies to produce capital. We're not very good at running companies to endure and to be resilient. And between the two things, I think both are important, by the way. But I think that we sometimes prioritize incorrectly. If you think about a company that might endure over a long time, a few years ago, I looked at the longest lived companies in the world. The oldest company in the world was founded 100 years after the fall of the Roman Empire. It's a construction company in Japan that's been around for 1,500 years, something like that, 1,600 years. And these companies that endure for a long time are really, there's a lot we can learn from them. But I as a builder, an entrepreneur who's building companies, I want the things I build to last for a long time. And I want them to also generate profitability that helps everyone involved. Customers means we're producing value, employees, and the owners, the investors in these businesses all benefit. Society benefits. But I think it's more important that these companies generate profit for a long time. If you look at the total amount of profit under the curve over the lifespan of a company, that total volume of profit is more important than the profitable spike that you might do in the next quarter or two or next year or two. We should be building things that endure. And I think we all have a desire in us to do that. I want to be a good
Absolutely.
ancestor, right? I think we all want to be good ancestors for those yet to come. Not build things that are just flash in the pan, but things that can last.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it seems that that definitely requires a different degree of thinking. RONA, ROIC, IRR are maybe not going to get us there. But what I'm amazed at, Elliot, is COVID wasn't the first crisis, right? There's been crises. I think you noted in the book that traditionally, maybe every 10 years or so, corporations know that crisis comes. So oftentimes it seems like to me they're saving up to try to essentially wait for crisis to end whenever COVID ends, to get back into the swing of things. But the ability for corporations not just to hang on during times of crisis, but pivot with times of crisis, change and actually continue to be successful rather than just reach into their reserves seems like something they could achieve given some of what you've brought to the table, and it sounds like some of the things that we'll kind of move on to discuss even in this interview. So to me, it feels like there's a scarcity element there, but I think that certainly optimism is going to play its weight here. Um, you note that very few companies have successfully innovated internally alone. This kind of got me thinking of some companies, small businesses, medium, even large businesses. That is the only way they go about innovating. Elliot is internally alone. You talk about how they need to collaborate with external assets and resources in the form of startups. So why do individuals and small teams have an innovative advantage right now? How can they exercise this advantage?
Yeah, here's the thing. The magic of entrepreneurs. We talked a bunch about the kind of the power and strength of large corporations, and they are an incredible invention that have done a lot of good for humanity. These large corporations, as they scale, become optimized for safety, predictability. They are designed to preserve what exists. And so as a result, they are really good at executing. They're execution machines. They can execute across the globe at incredible scale and do so very efficiently. The flip side of that strength is that they're really bad at learning. They're really bad at doing things that challenge the status quo, that compromise what has brought them to where they are today. Now, on the other hand, startups are fantastic learning machines.
Sure.
You have the governance and the way we make decisions, the incentives, the talent, the processes in place that ensure that they can identify problems and figure out solutions very, very quickly. They're terrible at executing, ironically, in the way that a large corporation can, right? A startup can't execute at global scale immediately, but they are
Right.
fantastic at learning. And the key thing is both. So we need both. We need the large corporations that can execute. We need the small startups that can learn. The trick is to find ways to combine the strengths of both and in ways that where everybody wins. Too often corporations are thinking, in fact, you hear this all the time. You hear the CEO of a big company say, we need to act more like a startup. That is a terrible idea. Most startups fail, and that's just not what they're good at. Rather, what they ought to be doing more is looking to startups who are solving some of those really ambiguous problems that corporations are ill suited to go after, and thinking, how do we partner? How do we invest? How do we buy when appropriate, or how do we even build from scratch when we can?
Wow. Wow. So there, I mean, certainly is an advantage right now for small teams and innovators who are solving very real problems. Their ability to be agile, to be lean is something that, and learn is something that corporations are not set up for. But we need both of these things. We need them to work together in order to maybe have the amount of progress, innovation, and value add that we want to see in our society. This is compelling. This makes a lot of sense. Um, Elliot, this is a slight turn in some ways, but not necessarily. I think that innovation, and I loved what you did in the book a bit later on. You went to talk about evolution. You looked at the natural world and drew parallels to help us understand innovation better. And I love that. This question might hit some of those notes, but not too much. If we can act out the practices of innovation in our lives to be better innovators in our lives, do you believe that it makes it easier to embody them in the businesses that we create? The thing that inspired this question was partly your notion there of, do corporations need to act like startups? Or they should not do that. And what I'm pointing out as well is maybe some startups try to avoid risk instead of try to learn and lean into what they're good at. Maybe some startups try to too quickly act like corporations. And I'm just curious, to the degree to which maybe we feel scarcity in our lives, does that reflect it in our business? To the degree that we experiment and seek variance in our lives, is that reflected in our business? And to what degree have you seen your ability to practice innovation in your life, and let that translate into what you're building?
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good question because all of this does apply in our lives too. If you think about the what we do inside of companies as our companies grow, this is true in startups. My company right now, we're about 55 people. So I'd still throw us in the startup category. We launch startups. We'll launch about a dozen companies this year in partnership with corporations. And we feel the pain too of trying to eradicate errors and problems from the system to try to make things more predictable and safe. That is a good impulse, by the way. We do it in our own lives. You kind of get fixed on a way that you think the world works, and you try to operate within that construct, and
Mm,
you try to ignore the things that challenge that belief
sure,
and that
sure.
status quo. That's a totally natural thing. To mention Clay Christensen again, he back when he was teaching at the Harvard Business School, he loved woodworking, and he at one point made a sign that he hung outside his office. It said "Anomalies Wanted," and there was nothing he loved more than for somebody to come to him and bring some challenge to one of his theories, some piece of evidence that said, actually, this theory that you have is wrong, and here's how it's slightly wrong. Because in that process, it made his theories better. And I think if you think about that as a kind of a construct, when we run our companies, we ought to be thinking about it the same way. Our goal is to uncover anomalies, to uncover knowledge. In fact, if you think about, there's a really good
Mm,
philosopher out of the UK named David Deutsch. Highly recommend he's got a wonderful book called The Beginning of Infinity. And what he argues is that problems in our lives, in our business, in society are inevitable. All problems are solvable within the laws of physics, and problems are also beneficial drivers of progress. The thing is, we can't predict what problems are going to arise in our own lives or
sure.
in our
Yeah.
companies. The only thing you can do to prepare, because we can't predict the problems, is focus on gathering as much knowledge and wealth as you can to be ready for anything that might happen. As we talked about in our large companies, we've gotten really good at gathering wealth. We've gotten
Mm,
really bad at gathering knowledge, seeking out anomalies that challenge the way that we think. In fact, when we run our organizations, the way we operate often is we assume that if we can reduce errors in our company, that's a good thing. We also recognize that we want to increase the amount of insights that we're gathering, the knowledge that we're gathering. The problem is that you can't simultaneously reduce errors in the system and increase the amount of insights that you gather.
wow.
There's a proper amount of error making or problems that need to arise in an organization to ensure that you're uncovering anomalies and gathering insights. It's those insights that lead to knowledge and serendipity ultimately, and that's what we ought to be after. If you're in an
Amazing.
organization where you're not experiencing any errors, that's an organization that's dying. It's ceased to learn, and it's a problem. Um, we don't thrive in systems like that as humans. We need to be in systems that are vibrant and alive, and that
Yes.
requires some deliberate inefficiency and even some welcoming of problems and chaos, so that we can learn and do
I
better.
loved the term in the book that you gave to the maybe those corporations you see that aren't changing, that are dying. You called the people they're corporate hospice workers. I thought that that
Yep.
was
Yep.
a funny way to put that. Just given the question I asked, some of your notes here, I think that it is maybe intuitive to keep ourselves safe and mitigate risk. But on another notion here, nature seems to be a great innovator. Given we come from nature, are we great innovators by default also? Meaning, is innovation intuitive to us or is it counterintuitive? Are we being suppressed by our frameworks of efficiency or led astray by our nature that seems to view innovation as counterintuitive? Do you think it's a more natural state of what we do or no?
Yeah, I think it's both, and let me
Okay.
explain why. I think that naturally we're all curious. We all want to discover and learn, gather knowledge. On the other hand, we also want to be safe and protected. And being safe and protected and having things be predictable is the antithesis of learning and innovation. The only way that you learn and progress is by putting the system through hardship and through difficulty. There's an example, in fact, I give in the book of a power lifter named Hafthor Bjornsson. And if we were doing this with video, I'd show the video of him breaking the world's record for heaviest deadlift. It's crazy. You get a chance, go Google it, find the video. Hafthor Bjornsson, his nickname is the Mountain. You may know of him by that name. And he broke the world's record for heaviest deadlift, 501 kilos, 1,100 pounds. And the only reason it's 501 kilos is because there's a guy who he can't stand in the UK who had the previous record at 500 kilos, and he was like, I'm just gonna beat that guy by a kilo." So it was like a spite lift, That's what he did.
Sure, sure.
But it's a crazy video because I mean, he's lifting this amount of weight. Nobody in the history of the world had ever done this before when he did it. And the strain of the lift was so incredibly hard on his body that when he gets done, unfortunately, we don't see this on the video, but when he gets done with the lift, he started bleeding from his eye sockets.
My
And
goodness.
the thing to note is that like this is now Thor, he's 6'9". So he's better equipped to break this world's record than I am, many of us, right? But he's
Maybe
also
both of us combined.
yeah, yeah, well, that's exactly, exactly. But and at the time of this lift, he weighed 450 pounds. That is not his natural weight, that he came into the world at. He had to eat 10,000 calories a day for a couple years. That's 5 or
Wow.
6 full meals. It sounds like, oh, that'd be fun. That's not fun. That is crazy amount of food to have to ingest. He went through really hard workouts for a couple of years where he was breaking down muscle, literally tearing muscle in his body, creating new connections between his brain and his muscles so that he could build up the connections that would enable him to do this hard lift. And the lesson is, like, if you think about if he had chosen a strategy similar to what our large corporations, our companies do, let's avoid pain and see if we can accomplish great things, he wouldn't have done this. He had to
Yeah.
deliberately choose difficulty and strain, right, to be able to accomplish this amazing thing. And the same is true in powerlifting as what was true in our own lives. If we want to
Yes.
learn and progress, we have to be willing to endure some difficulty. Progress only comes through problems, embracing
Wow.
of those problems, not avoiding them.
Yes. In
And
that
so
stress
often
and
they're
the
like,
tension.
exactly
Yes.
right.
It seems to me that with Thor, this story of Thor, which I love to take that in the book, and folks who are listening to the interview right now, up in the jumbotron, you can go and get your hands on a copy of the Illusion of Innovation. Also, the Spotify does an audiobook that's actually read by Elliot. It is just phenomenal. Highly, highly recommended. When you talked about this in the book, Elliot, this Thor character, I looked into his stress and tension as there was a degree of alignment with what he was feeling and the stress and tension of the food of the lifts, where he could see that the result could be the chance of lifting one more kilogram. For a lot of us, what I think can happen is the stress and tension we feel in our lives, we don't see the same degree of alignment as it unlocking the results that we might want to see in a different domain. And it's interesting for me when I was reading, I was thinking, I wish that I could have that degree of alignment to know that the things that are stressing me out or giving me tension are certainly the things that'll give me results in the domain that I want. And I know that there's a certainty there. There's an objective there. And I realized throughout the book you kind of challenged my thinking about what it means to have an objective in general, and how having lofty objectives may not be as good for us as it could be. But maybe to back it up a little bit, this idea of alignment between stress and tension, even for us as individuals and in our business, how important is it to try to align what we're fighting through to make sure it's what we're fighting for, and where do we give that up to pivot? Might be kind of a good notion there.
Yeah, yeah. Let me give you a contrast to a couple of CEOs who are well known to explain this concept because
Sure.
you could misinterpret what I'm saying. You could, on the one hand, say, "Hey, an organization that has 0 errors, that's really bad. That's an organization that's dying. You need to avoid that." Well, the other end of the extreme is also bad, complete chaos, right? You need to find that sweet spot somewhere in the middle where you've got that proper amount of deliberate inefficiency of embracing of problems. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was the CEO of General Electric was a guy named Jack Welch who was a brilliant leader, just accomplished amazing things. He once said, "Variability is evil," when he was talking about managing General Electric. Variability
Hmm.
is evil, meaning his goal was to, as CEO, he believed was to root out all error making in the system, to make things as predictable as possible. We're down to, every process in the business is going to be free from error. And in the process of doing that, what he did is he took a great company, I believe, and he took the life out of it. He took the humanity out of it. As a company that generated was he was
Sure.
able to extract. profits from for a few years until it kind of ran into the ground. The GE of today is not the GE of before the Jack Welch era. And you can contrast that with a CEO named Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, also a brilliant leader. Netflix is a company that under Reed Hastings' watch went through multiple transformations, right? Digital started out mailing DVDs, went to digital delivery, quite controversially when it happened, and then shifted from that to content production. Three big transformations. Amazing accomplishment to do that while growing, scaling a business. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And what Reed Hastings said is that in their business, I'll paraphrase him a little bit, but a little bit of chaos is good as long as that chaos is fertile. And what he said specifically was over time, fertility will always beat sterility. And that's I think the
Amazing.
right message is that it's not complete chaos, it's chaos towards an end, right? It's chaos that is fertile, meaning it's producing the knowledge, it's helping us uncover those anomalies. Think about when we run a business. The way that you learn is by running experiments, meaning you go do things where you're not quite sure what's going to happen on the other side of it. That's an experiment. But so often when we're running business, because we're nervous and afraid about destroying what we've built up, the experiments that we run are actually designed to reinforce what we already know.
Mm,
Those experiments are a waste of time, really. What we ought to be doing is designing experiments, deliberate inefficiency, designing experiments that are meant to challenge the status quo or what we think about the world. And there's a lot of great examples of organizations doing that, and in particular of entrepreneurs who do that really, really well.
I love this notion of fertility versus sterility. And you talk about in the book trying to avoid this place where efficiency can be taken too far. I think you beautifully have captured it there. But one thing that in this world is at the front of my mind is how is experimenting to create optionality for times of crisis different from building empowering innovations that invite change before crisis. So there's this idea, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Should we only innovate when external factors demand it, the context or environment changes, or there's crisis? Or should we make it better if it ain't broke and proactively change?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and the answer is it depends. Let me go. It goes back to the idea of Clay Christensen's innovator's dilemma. Let me just explain that for a second, what it is for those who may not be
Sure.
familiar. And if you're not, highly recommend going out and reading that book. The Innovator's Solution is actually the sequel and better explaining it. But what he said was that when you're running an organization, you can do everything right to serve your best customers in ever more profitable ways. And over time, by doing all the right things, your business will inevitably go bankrupt. And the reason why is that as you move up market to serve more profitable customers, you leave yourself exposed at the low end for new entrants who come in with good enough products, grab a foothold in the market, and then move up market themselves and displace you and other incumbents. It's a very hard problem to solve. So you can look at that. You can say, we're not going to focus on, we're just going to focus on continuing to do what we do best, maybe a little bit more efficiently each year for our best customers. That is a valid strategic choice, but in that choice, you have to recognize that you are choosing to go out of business faster than you might otherwise.
Mm,
You need to be again gathering those anomalies, the knowledge, the insights that are going to enable you to be more resilient over time. Remember, a few years ago, we do an annual conference on innovation and venture building. It's called Alloy. Super fun. Get amazing people to come out to that. And a couple of years ago, we had a woman come and speak who was in charge of innovation for the royal family of Great Britain. So she worked for the Queen, and her job was to figure out what about the Queen of England and that royal family, the way they operate, needed to stay the same and should never change,
mm.
and what should change, what needs to be addressed and altered, and then how do we do that? And
What
that's
a
the, that
hard
is
thing to
that is the
do.
key decision. Yeah, right. But what a fun job, right?
You're right.
Uh, when you look at organizations that have endured for a long time, talking about some of those longest lived companies, what they're really good at is identifying the foundation that will never change, that makes them who they are, that must remain the same. Think about like one of the oldest companies in the world is a hotel in Japan. The hot springs at the heart of that hotel have never changed. The spirit of welcoming guests, all those things, that never changes. But all the other things on the periphery change all the time. They accept credit cards. The menu gets updated, whatever. Like there's all kinds of innovation happening around that,
right?
and it's important to just recognize what you need to hold and where everything else needs to purposely be adjusted and adapted all the time if you're going to endure.
What an interesting challenge that innovators have in general, because I know of some companies. I mean, I think Wrigley is a good example. They started selling what, baking powder and soap, and they gave away gum for free with their baking powder and soap. And nobody liked the baking powder or soap, so they pivoted to gum because everybody loved the gum. Talk about removing or changing the thing that you would have thought would have been constant for a baking powder or soap company, right? And moving from that. So what a challenge that innovators have to navigate that. But when they get it right, how big is that, right? And I think moving into the next point, magnitude versus frequency of correctness. And when I read this in your work, Elliot, I thought that's well understood that the magnitude of our correctness when we're right, and correct. I like your note about being contrarian and correct is definitely better than being contrarian and wrong. Um, but the magnitude versus frequency of correctness is something that innovators in this room struggle with every day. And when we don't, maybe when we don't hone into the fact that there's a truth there about resilience in our individual lives, meaning we're going to experience a lot of failure because as innovators, you're frequently going to be incorrect. But when you're right, you might be right big time. And that is huge, right? That's where you can have disruption in a company built around something phenomenal. So
Yep.
in this idea of magnitude versus frequency of correctness, we're going to fail a lot and maybe not wanting to fail. What does this mean for the culture within innovative organizations or companies that want to be innovative, or about innovators themselves? What does this tell us?
Yeah. So you mentioned the idea of being kind of anti-consensus and right. If you think about, imagine in your head a two by two. On one axis, you can be right or you can be wrong in your bets about the future. And on the other axis, you can go with the consensus or you can go against the consensus. Now, if you're going to be wrong, you're going to be wrong. You're going to go out of business, whether you're in a startup or big company. If you are right and you're going along with the crowd, with the consensus, that is a path to failure. You're also going to go out of business over time, actually, because you haven't done anything unique that sets you apart. You're going to lose to somebody else who does. So the only way to win in business over the long run is to be anti-consensus or contrarian and turn out to be right. That is a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
A really hard thing to do. And so when you think about to the other point you're making, Josh, if you think about the inside of big companies are optimized for frequency of correctness, meaning we are always going to be right. We're never going to be wrong. We're going to be right in a million small ways every day. We're never going to be wrong. In other words, don't make a mistake.
Mm,
Startups, on the other hand, are optimized for the magnitude of correctness, meaning we can be wrong all the time because we know if we get one of these things right, it's going to pay off in enormous ways, exponential outcomes. And you kind of, I think different personalities are suited for different types of environments. For me as an entrepreneur, I love aiming for magnitude of correctness and not
mm.
worrying so much about frequency. And I think that's a path toward faster learning in a business, faster learning in our lives as well. You need to again be willing to put the system under some strain and tension to be able to uncover those anomalies and big things that lead to big outcomes.
You talk about the power law asset class, and you say insights are a power law asset class, and it makes me think about this magnitude versus frequency of correctness, of the variance that you suggested we need to go after when we're innovating. I didn't necessarily hear that term beforehand, but once I understood, very kind of in a layman fashion, what power law asset class meant, it made me realize how important it is to have variance in my insight gathering. Um, And maybe briefly, Elliot, there's a lot of folks in the room, a lot of innovators. Would you mind describing what you mean by insights are a power law asset class?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in the world of venture capital I operate in, we're building companies and investing in companies. Venture capital is a weird investment class because you need to invest in a lot of things in order to earn a return. You don't know ahead of time which investments are going to pay off. And so you might have a basket of 30 different investments. Maybe two or three of those are going to be the investments that pay for the whole effort. And you're going to have many failures in that basket of investments, unfortunately. That's a power law asset class. Contrast that with like public equities investing in the stock market. You can invest in a set of 30 stocks almost randomly, and you're gonna experience kind of a standard bell curve distribution of returns from that investment. Meaning you don't have to do a whole lot of things. You can do it kind of on average. You're going to get average returns and be okay. Power law, you need to do a whole lot of things. You don't know which things at a time are going to be the ones that really pay off. You think about gathering insights, and your job as an innovator inside a big company or as an entrepreneur is to gather insights that lead to serendipity. You don't know ahead of time which insights are going to be the ones that are the game changers. And so you have to focus on gathering a lot of insights. The way we gather insights is by running experiments that are designed to challenge the status quo. And what that means is you have to constantly be running a lot of experiments. You have to generate a lot of insights because it's going to be the one, two, or three along the way that turn out to be the big things. And if you stop at 10 experiments and 10 insights, it's just not a portfolio that's big enough to lead to those kinds of power law outcomes. You might get lucky, but the chances are you're not. You're going to miss out on something you would have discovered in experiment number 42 that would have led to some big insight and some exponential outcome. So you want to gather as many insights as possible. You want to gather as much knowledge and as much wealth as you can to be prepared for any problem or opportunity that might arise, especially those that you can't yet predict.
Elliot, you say in the book, quote, experiments uncover anomalies. Anomalies are building blocks to insights, and insight is what causes serendipity. And when I read that, I was like, this is incredible. This is just it's true, it's solid, it's amazing. I just wanted to share that quote in the vein of where we are in the discussion here. Um, as a slight pivot to where we are, Elliot, you say in the book, in a perfect market there would be no corporations, and then you go on to say the apex of centralized corporation is over. What do you mean? And are we headed there? What does this mean for folks in the room, innovators listening to this, small teams of startups listening to this right now? In a perfect market, there would be no corporations. What do you mean by that? I think it's an incredible quote. I just wanted to hear more of your thinking.
Yeah, not my original idea. There's a guy 100 years ago won a Nobel Prize for this idea, actually.
Okay,
He sought to understand, why do corporations exist at all? And why do these arise in the market? Because if you believe the market was perfectly efficient, you wouldn't need corporations. We'd all interact with each other individually to get things done. We'd swarm a problem, we'd disperse, and the market would be perfectly efficient. But corporations do exist. And what he said, the guy named Ronald Coase, if you want to look him up, Coase, what he said is that corporations exist to identify opportunities, ways to manage transactions inside the walls of the corporation more efficiently than can be done outside the corporation. And that delta between what they can do internally and what can be done in the market is what is profit for a corporation. So they're trying to do things more efficiently within the walls of corporation and can be done outside. Now, in today's world, the outside the corporation is much more efficient than it once was, thanks to advances in technology, communication,
yes,
access to capital. And so, as the world has shifted, corporations really haven't changed their organizational structures and their approach to doing things. But they're now operating in a world where the external world is much more efficient, and in many cases, much more efficient than what can possibly be done inside a corporation. This is an
sure,
amazing time to be an entrepreneur as a result. If you look at the size of companies, in terms of the number of people employed, it's decreasing every year, meaning people are starting businesses with fewer people, smaller teams, and able to accomplish much more. I think over the next few years, we will see trillion-dollar companies come into the market with very, very small teams. Everybody remembers the acquisition of Instagram several years ago. They have like
Yeah.
20 or fewer employees, were purchased for 1 billion, and everyone was shocked at this. Now they were generating a ton of value, and Meta, Facebook at the time in that acquisition, got a steal, probably the best acquisition they've ever done. We're going to see a lot more of this. As entrepreneurs, it's much easier to start companies than it's ever been. It's much easier to access capital. It's much easier to access the communication networks that you need to tap into to make things happen. And that's really exciting, I think. And we're going to continue to see the number of people inside of companies go down. And it's fun to think about what the limit on that is. I think we'll see
Yeah.
a lot more
Yeah.
solopreneurs find success, but I actually think that the limit is not one person. The limit is zero. We will see
Right.
AI driven companies that are where you've just got a robot doing things. Now, people in the background benefiting from that, of course, but it's going to be a fun the next decade to see the size of companies shrink and their impact also increase at the same time.
What a time to be alive, and provocative without a doubt. Suggesting we might have these companies with no people. This point that transaction costs, decentralization are leading to drastic changes makes me feel like it's a change of an age in some sense, Elliot. We're moving from
Totally.
this age of information where that's in abundance and it's readily available, and we've just jammed all of our information into these AI models. To me, that represents the end of the age of information, and perhaps by what you're signaling, and even in the book you talk about, I think, $2 trillion of dry powder within the private or venture capital world, and maybe that was an aggregate private equity venture capital from something I looked up, but the
Hmm.
amount of dry powder ready for great ideas, and the ability for anybody to now, more different than 20 years ago, even 10, let alone 50, to create businesses and solve problems is enhanced unlike ever before. Do you think we're changing into an age? Do you think the age is rolling over, and what does that look like to you? How
Totally.
might you define that?
Totally. We're moving into an age of abundance, right? You think of the
Yeah.
cost of energy is going to zero, the cost of compute is going to zero, and the cost of communication is going to zero. And you think about go back to ancient Egypt for a second and think about, if you don't mind the diversion. Ancient Egypt is an
Not at
amazing
all.
civilization, lasted for 3,000, 3,500 years. And over that time period, innovation in ancient Egypt was relatively slow compared to today. If you think about it, there weren't that many people, so there weren't that many nodes in the network. It was really hard to communicate at the time. And then similarly, they didn't have a lot of technology building blocks to build upon. Um, they had to invent things like spoons and tables and
Mm,
marshmallows. They invented marshmallows in ancient Egypt. We're the beneficiary of all those things they figured out. The rate of change is driven by two factors. It's driven by the number of nodes in a network and their ability to communicate and share ideas. And number two, the number of building blocks or ideas that are there to be shared. Now, we live in a world where we can pick up a phone and have a FaceTime call with anybody on the planet for pretty much free. Now, so you ask the question, then what happens in a world where everybody is able to communicate with anybody
right.
at zero cost? And we've got this massive, and everybody's got access to all the information in the world at the same time to share and to build upon. And the answer is we don't know what's going to happen. We've never lived in a world like this
Right.
before. All we
Right.
know is the rate of change is going to increase. The future is going to be much much weirder than we can imagine. It's going to get here a lot faster than we think.
My goodness. Okay. And that's going to mean, part of your book, I think, compels corporations to see opportunity, but also innovators, individuals and small teams to see opportunity. And so, we're changing. Transaction costs are going down. Decentralization is a very real thing. There's an opportunity still for large firms here, right? You mentioned in the book that maybe this opportunity, it's even enormous, right? Can you talk to me about what is the opportunity for the larger firms, and how do the startups and the innovators fit into that? And I think we're starting to get more of a picture, but I think we can even really pin in on some of this here.
Yeah, large firms have a really deep understanding of the markets in which they operate and customers that they have. And they also have this amazing ability to execute at scale, to take things out and to just propagate them across the world almost instantly once they decide to do it. That's incredible. As entrepreneurs building small companies and startups, we are envious of that ability to do things at that level of scale and also to have the insights of the markets, understanding of markets and customers. And so the opportunity for entrepreneurs is to figure out ways to partner with those large companies that have those insights, but lack the ability to go out and pursue them because they can't learn fast enough.
Mm.
And that's the thesis behind my company, right? We partner with large corporations to go build startups, and there's a never ending. People ask me sometimes, "Well, aren't you afraid you're going to run out of ideas for companies to launch?" I, like, no, we can pick any market, any industry, and there's an endless amount of
Right,
companies we could go
right.
build. That's the hardest thing actually is choosing where to focus and what to do. There's so much opportunity out there, but these large companies really, for us, it's incredibly helpful to get their insights on where opportunity exists. We've launched some really compelling, super interesting, very valuable businesses in spaces that I knew nothing about
Mm,
beforehand, and never ideas I never would have come up with on my own. We could have sat in a room for a
wow.
thousand years, we wouldn't have figured these out. But going and working with these corporations, we spot problems. They've got problems all over the place. Each of them begging for a startup and an entrepreneur to go solve them.
It's so interesting when you talk about pushing the experimentation and the risk towards the outskirts of the organization, similar to how the variants or mutations of cell happen within organisms. It sounds like maybe you're introducing that the opportunity is for corporations to look more like organisms evolving rather than machines. And I love that contrast that, maybe we're picturing our organizations as too much of machines. And what we need to do is give them the ability for rapid experimentation at the borders where success means big wins and failure doesn't mean too much negative. And I think that's such an exciting future to be moving towards is corporations and startups finding that collaborative framework. So
Hmm.
I want to, yeah, just such a compelling business that you're involved in there at High Alpha, and just amazing work through and through. I know that we're at about the hour point here. I want to be mindful of your time. I have maybe, I don't know, 4 to 6 to maybe 10 questions that I'd be happy to throw out. I also want to respect the fact that this is a two-way podcast, Elliot. We're a community of innovators who are, this is a collision hub of great ideas. To talk about seeing things that I could have never come up with if I spent 10,000 hours in a room. Innovators in this room are constantly doing some very incredible things. So I want to be mindful of them, but I also want to give them an opportunity to ask you a question, notably Tim on stage, Dave, and any other folks that might want to do that. So I'm going to throw a couple more on out here, Elliot. We can kind of keep cruising. And if at any point you say, "Hey, Josh, I've had enough. I'm tapping out of the ITT," and we get to our time, just let me know, and we can certainly make a pivot.
This is fun. Let's keep
Beautiful.
going.
Um, let's see. You in chapter 7 talk about the art of the controlled burn, and you correlate fire debt to innovation debt. And I am digging into this because I want folks who are in the room, go get this book, go read this, grab a copy, listen to the audiobook, understand how a lot of these pieces are coming together. I've read it twice, and even we'll go on to a third time. I'm sure there's things I'll find that I missed and things I'll have to send a note to Elliot on. You talked about the art of the controlled burn, and it made me reflect personally. It made me look at our government and incentives in a certain way.
Yep.
And for me, it was, I mean, talk about a really interesting case study that highlights why we're due for a change. You talked about bad incentives being from quote top down hierarchical management that ends up tipping scales to efficiency. And I'm curious, how bad is the innovation debt in the corporate landscape? And how do you predict this will unfold? In the example you gave in California, obviously it unfolds via massive wildfires. How is this going to predict, or how is this going to unfold in the corporate landscape? Are we going to see massive fires or massive restructuring? And feel free to take a moment to talk a little bit about that art of the controlled burn and any nuances there you might want to share with this community. Of course, they can go pick up the book and read all this themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very timely. So I'm originally from California, where people talk about something called a fire season, which is crazy that we accept that there's a fire
Yeah,
season where fires come in and burn things down and kill people. It's just it's nuts. And the crazy thing about it, my great grandparents are buried in a cemetery in a town called Paradise, California, which I don't know, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, experienced a crazy fire. At the time, the worst fire in California.
wow.
Unfortunately, it's been surpassed now, but at the time was the worst fire in California's history, called the Camp Fire, and it burned down the town of Paradise. And fires in the Western United States are really interesting phenomenon because they are the byproduct, ironically, of very effective management. Here's what I mean by that. If you go back and look at the history of fires in the Western United States, you can do this by looking at trees in forests in California. You can cut down the trees. You can look at the tree rings, and you can see when fires have gone through these forests. You can measure both the frequency and the intensity of forest fires. And as people started to populate the Western United States in greater numbers back in the mid 1800s, we got very, very good at putting out fires. You see, if you look at the charts on this, you'll see that fires stopped almost entirely. And when they did come up, the intensity was less. So we got really, really good at managing fires, really good. As soon as a fire popped up, we're going to put it out. Again, this is incredible management, incredible feats of human ingenuity
Sure.
to be able to do this, to preserve. We don't want fires burning down people's homes or taking lives. And so we got really good at managing these fires as soon as they pop up. The problem is in that effort, that focus on what you might call efficiency, what happened is that the forest became very, very dense, 10 times as dense with burnable debris than they used to have. Back in the old days, when fires would come through every now and then, it would clear things out. And so when fires did pop up and they burned, they weren't so intense. There wasn't that much fuel. Well, we've gotten so good at putting out fires that when fires do pop up now, they're extraordinarily intense, and that's a problem because what happens is they take out entire towns like Paradise or like Pacific Palisades or Malibu. And the irony again is that the reason that happens is that we've gotten really good at management of these circumstances. We're really good at putting out fires as soon as they pop up. And so the question then arises, well, what do we do about this? What do we change? Everybody knows exactly what to do, but nothing can get done.
Mm,
The answer is you pursue a strategy of controlled burns. You map out put against the map a checkerboard, and you burn certain areas in that checkerboard to prevent fires when they pop up from being able to spread. It's an incentive problem. I think a couple years ago, California burned something like 20,000 acres on purpose in deliberate burns. Now, in California, if you're going to do a deliberate burn, this is insane. It's hard to believe this is true, but it is. If you're going to do a deliberate burn in California, you have to send in your kind of a report ahead of time about what you're going to do. Your burn has to adhere to the Clean Air Act, and make sure you're not having too much impact on the environment, which is insane because when a fire does come,
right.
uh, forget that the fire don't it doesn't care about the Clean Air Act.
Yeah.
It's much much worse for the environment on that. It is anyway. We all know what we need to do. It's doing these controlled burns. California, it's estimated, has a fire debt in terms of the amount of land that needs to be burned to catch up so that these fires don't burn so intensely. It's believed that that fire debt may be as large as the entire area of the state of Maine. And so
My
to burn
goodness.
20,000 acres a year deliberately is it's nothing. It doesn't matter. And it's a problem of incentives. If you're a land manager, the chance that a fire is going to come on your watch on the land is very low. And so you don't want to take precautions. You don't want to do anything about it, especially a controlled burn that might spin out of control and do something bad. And so you're not incentivized to take any action. So at a system wide level, everybody knows what needs to be done, yet nothing changes. And we see this over and over again in organizations and systems that are optimized for that kind of efficiency, where we're really effective
Yeah.
managers. We can't pursue these strategies, these controlled burns that we know we need to do because we're so good at optimizing for other things. And so you think about it in a company, as a company gets really good at putting out the equivalent of fires as soon as they pop up, at eradicating mistakes, they accumulate the equivalent of kind of these dense forests. And when a crisis does come and something breaks, that crisis burns with incredible intensity and takes these companies out very quickly. And that's where you see the companies with more money on their balance sheets than ever before, but going out of business faster. That's the problem. We're really good at managing these companies. We're just optimizing them for the wrong things.
You would think, Elliot, that this would be something business would learn over time. I know that quarterly reports, annual reports in our regulatory environment and our attention spans can only, allow for so much. You even pointed out in the book that, one of these fire managers, he's not likely to encounter crisis during his tenure. So the best thing that he could do is not have any fires during his time there, right? That makes him look really good. But whoever is watch that does come on, it wasn't just because of their missteps. It was because of aggregated, missteps to incentives that were no good. And it's just such an interesting point, and I really appreciate you expanding on that for innovators who are in the room with us. It's such an interesting point. I wonder what sort of innovation debt we have in our lives that individually, right? Places that we haven't changed and just continue to not take the controlled burns that we should take.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
Very,
I
very
think that
interesting.
I think the solution as individuals, by the way, to this type of problem is to think across really long timelines. And you'll find that that becomes a competitive advantage for you because most people don't
Mm,
think that way. Like, yeah, I'll give you just a quick aside on this. I was in Japan last year. We launched companies in Japan with a venture fund over there, and so I was in Kyoto about a year ago, and my most recent trip, and went to this temple in Kyoto that's 1,400 years old. It's amazing. It's beautiful. And they do an excellent job of preserving the temple using ancient construction techniques. And every 15 years, they replace the wooden floors in this temple. And they don't go down to Home Depot and pick up flooring. They grow trees in the hills around the temple expressly for this purpose of replacing the floors in the temple. And when we were there, they had just done the floors. They just replaced the floors with wood from camphor trees that had been planted back in the 1600s for that purpose by somebody who
wow.
knew that in the 21st century they were going to need to replace the floors. And what they told us was that they had just been planting trees in the hills that they knew were going to be harvested in the 25th century for somebody to replace the floors in the temple.
Wow.
That I find that so inspiring to be able to think across long timelines
Me
like
too.
that. I wanna build things like that that endure and last a long time. There's that I remember Jeff Bezos, when he was running Amazon, he did a town hall with all his employees, and this made the news because he got up in front of his employees and said, "Amazon's gonna go bankrupt." And everyone thought, "How what? You're the CEO of this company. How can you say this? And you're crushing it. What are you talking about?" But of course, Amazon is gonna go bankrupt one day. It's gonna die. And what he told his employees, it's our job as employees of Amazon to prolong that date of death for as long as we possibly can. We do that by
Mm,
innovating. And Amazon is an example of a company that thinks across really long timelines. And that became their competitive advantage for the first 25 years, whatever it was of that company. They plowed every cent they had back into investing in that business to grow it. Wall Street couldn't believe that they weren't taking any profits. Um, but that long-term thinking is what produced a really compelling, very resilient business that will endure for a long, long time.
incredible. Elliot, in the book, you say, quote, experiments are like call options on a range of future possibilities. By the way, I love that quote. And you go on to say that the teams that win take more shots.
Yeah,
To me, I mean, it pins into some of what you're talking about, even with Amazon. Experiments are like call options on a range of future possibilities. What a way for innovators to think about that. That crisis and change is certainly going to come. We don't know exactly what it'll look like, but by experimenting, we create that optionality to address, excuse me, the future possibilities that come. But my question here is, you talk about the teams that win take more shots. How do these relate? This idea of experiments, are like call options, and we need to have as many maybe call options as we can. And the teams that are taking more shots win. Is there a short term and long term benefit to this ideology?
Yeah, there's a question, what matters more? Is it the quantity of experiments? In other words, just run a whole bunch of experiments, or is it the quality of those experiments? Most organizations err in thinking that it's the quality of experiments. Let's run a few experiments to make sure they're really, really good. And if you look at, there's an example I use in the book is the 3-point rule in the NBA. Apologies for those who are not basketball fans, but the 3-point rule is a relatively recent invention. I think it was the 1978-79 season that was implemented in the NBA, meaning in front of the line, close to the net, you score 2 points. But if you make a shot beyond the line, you score 3 points. And at the time when this was introduced, people thought, this is kind of a novelty, but it's not really going to change the game very much. It's turned out to have had a dramatic impact on the way basketball is played, for both for better and for worse, I think. If you look now, almost 50 years later after the implementation of the rule, almost all of the shots in NBA games are shot either right next to the net or just beyond the 3-point line, because that's in terms of like your expected value per shot is where you get the most bang for your buck. The last team to win a game in the NBA without attempting to make any 3-pointers or not making any 3-point shots, I was like in 2016. We'll never see that again. 40% plus of the points in the game are from 3-point shots these days. And the lesson there is that it's both the quantity and the quality of shots taken that matters. The teams that win are the teams that take a lot of shots and the teams that do so really strategically. And that's true in our businesses too. You want to be running a lot of experiments, but you want to make sure those experiments are being done strategically. Again, I was talking about earlier that the opposite of no problems, no mistakes in a business is also just as bad as the other end of the spectrum, right? You don't want to pursue complete chaos
Yes.
and let everybody go do whatever. So you want to use the constraints in your company. There's only a certain amount of time and money and energy. You know the strategic direction in which you're operating. So run as many experiments as you can at the lowest possible cost per experiment within those strategic constraints. And that's how you're going to win over time. You want to run experiments that we say are fast, which is obvious, are cheap and inexpensive, decentralized, meaning where either failure or success is inexpensive.
Mm.
And you want to run experiments that are weird, meaning designed to challenge the status quo, uncover anomalies.
One of my follow-up questions later on was, how are we balancing constraints and variance? I'm not even going to ask it because I think that what you just pinned in there answers that incredibly on its own. How can we utilize the thinking, Elliot, of you talk about relative value and real value in the book. And as far as the assessing which experiments to do, can you talk to me and innovators about what your thoughts are in terms of relative value assessment and real value assessment?
Well, an easy way to think about this is I can tell a quick story. I think it explains it really well. Walt Disney, I think, is a great example of living this in his life. When I grew up in California, I could see the fireworks at Disneyland outside our second story window in our house. And so every night this summer. And so Walt Disney kind of had an impact on my life in some ways as I was growing up. Walt Disney was an amazing innovator. So he reinvented multiple industries. First, invented this whole industry of animated full length movies, which was a pretty wild thing. You go back and read stories of when Snow White came out. It was incredible. It was this change the game for entertainment. And as he got out of through the other side of World War II, years later, all of a sudden all these competitors had popped up during World War II. It became much more expensive to produce animated films of the quality that he was used to, and he kind of fell into a funk where he was arguably, sounds like to me, fell into a depression and just kind
Mm.
of lost his interest in the business, frankly. And he had a really wise secretary who suggested he take a trip with a friend just to go check out and get some room for the business from the business before coming back. And so he went with a friend to a train convention in Chicago. They rode the train from Southern California to Chicago, and in Chicago went and visited this convention for enthusiasts of model trains. And he became absolutely obsessed with model trains after this convention, like to the point where he moved his family to a new house that had a yard big enough to build a rideable train in the backyard.
That's dedication,
And
man.
so,
That is dedication.
yeah, I mean, he repurposed part of the studio to make trains, and he taught himself how to do it. He took some of the engineers in Disney and learned how to make his own parts and things. And while he was playing with these trains, people around him thought he had lost his mind. And in fact, there was a New York Times critic at the time who lamented the fact that this innovator of their era was spending all his time on something so stupid and not putting out the kind of the groundbreaking entertainment that he had done before.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is in that pursuit of kind of just what he thought was interesting, what he began doing in addition to the building the trains was building little miniature towns and stuff around these trains with little people and all these things that kind of told a story of the trains. And he thought, people might like to see this. These are kind of cool. And he was making these things with his own hands, and he decided to put these things on a national tour. He's a good showman. And so he set up a series of events around the country where he showed off his trains and the kind of these model towns that he built around the trains. And you know what he called these exhibits? He called it Disneylandia. And so it's not clear exactly when, but somewhere along the
Yes.
way, this idea popped into his head of, boy, I can combine what I've learned about rides from building these trains, what I've learned about entertainment and storytelling from making movies, and what I've learned about experiences in building these little towns, and I can reinvent this whole new market. I'm not sure he started out with that grand vision, but he said, I want to build an amusement park called Disneyland. And so in the end, in the process of that, he reinvented this whole industry of amusement parks and did it yet again. Now, if he had set out at the beginning and just said, I'm going to go pick an industry that I'm going to reinvent and pursued that as kind of this lofty big objective, I don't think he ever would have done it. The reason he was able to succeed was he said, I want to go play with trains. He just found it interesting. And in that pursuit of what was interesting, he uncovered big
Sure.
opportunities. I think this is true for all of us too. You can set big, lofty objectives. You're actually less likely to achieve something big if you're pursuing big, lofty goals like that. Ironically, look at things in like the war on cancer, for example, or the war on poverty. These big, lofty goals we set as a society. We don't really achieve those objectives very well. But when we pursue what's interesting and right next to us, we're more likely to stumble into big
Mm,
discoveries
mm.
that lead to massive outcomes. So it is okay to go pursue things that are interesting. It's okay to go do the equivalent of playing with trains. That journey is valuable in itself, not just in the ends that it produces. And so I think we're all kind of wired and taught to go after big, lofty goals and stay
Yes,
focused,
absolutely.
stay focused. It's wrong. It's totally wrong. You're more likely to achieve something big by pursuing what's interesting and next to you, and
And
by
Elliot,
doing that
we're
over and
also
over again.
so sorry for stepping on your toes there. We're also taught to
Yeah.
stick to the plan. Not only do we have
Yeah.
these lofty goals, but stick to the plan. To
Yeah.
hey, if you laid out how you're going to do it, you better make it happen that way. And sometimes we're taking a round peg trying to put it through, a square hole or something like that. And so it makes some sense, but it seems against what maybe even innovators in this room thought they would hear today. I think that Elliot, they thought you were going to tell them, pick a lofty goal, go after it, make a plan, stick to the plan, innovate using this framework. But you're not, right? You're saying lofty goals may not be exactly what you need. Chasing what's interesting and continuing to aggregate and let action create data and let that knowledge compound over time. To use your words, is actually how we get to manufacturing serendipity and therefore creating something amazing.
Right. Right.
Yeah, this is phenomenal. Thank you for highlighting that difference between that relative value and real value. I think this is something we all deal with every day. If what we're about to do is going to be really valuable or relatively valuable to what we think we have going on. So very well positioned. I think I have maybe two more questions. Tim, I see you have a hand up. Dave, I noticed your hand went up a couple times during the session. Katie, Hardistry, and Emma, I see you guys have speaker requests in. We're going to go ahead and just wrap up a few more questions here. We'll bring some startups onto the stage, and do a little bit of Q&A, and then we will continue rocking here in this Innovators think tank. Let me just scroll on back here. I think you noted some of game theory in the book. You talked about infinite games versus finite games, and how as in a business is better played as an infinite game. And I think in a lot of ways, this concept can change how innovators approach what they're building. And my hope is for maybe for you to spend a moment, Elliot, talking to us about why business is better played as a infinite game, and why does this make sense in the age of abundance or age of innovation we're moving into?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing I learned in business school that was absolutely wrong. Um, I was told that the best form of a business in the end is a monopoly. What you're trying to do is figure out something nobody else is doing, go out and figure out how to build a monopoly in that space, and that's how you win. That is so wrong.
Sure.
And the reason it's wrong is that monopolies don't endure. Society finds a way to kill monopolies, either through innovation, through regulation, through government, through societal action. Monopolies don't endure. And so you can build a business actually that is short term, very successful, but extracts too much profit. And society will find a way to put you out of business. And so the better way, if you're going to build something that endures, is to extract just enough profit, produce just enough societal surplus that everybody's better off, everybody wins. There's this idea in Japanese business called Sanpo Yoshi, which I love. It's the notion that for your business to endure and be successful, everybody needs to benefit. The owners, the employees, the customers, society broadly. And if you lose track of that, you're overly focused, for example, just on the needs of your shareholders by running your company optimized for return on invested capital, as an example, and you're deprioritizing the other stakeholders, your business is not going to endure. It might shine brightly for the next year or two, but it won't last.
Mm,
And again, we want to build things that last. The idea of Sampo Yoshi is three-way satisfaction, is what it's called. Um, Employees, owners, society all benefit. And it comes out of these traveling salesmen in Japan 100 years ago, 150 years ago, who were going town to town selling their wares. And what they realized is that business was better when they took some of their profits and built a bridge or a school in the towns that they visited, because when they came
mm,
back to sell things again, people were more likely to buy. And it seems counterintuitive that that would be the case, right? That you would divert
right.
profits from your business to do something like that. But they were wise and recognized that in helping society and being viewed as a good kind of part of the society, people were much more likely to want to do business with them, and they created businesses that have lasted a long time as a result. So Senpo Yoshi, it all matters. You
Yes.
can't be too extractive in your profits. Your business will get shut down.
It makes so much sense, right? They had so much wisdom to excuse me, to act in that way. This infinite game that we can all play together certainly is better than a game where we rotate the winner and
Right?
reset the game every once in a while, which might
Infinite games,
be
everybody wins, right? Everybody
right.
wins. And you want to, when you're pursuing business, your goal is to building a business is like building a game where you're defining the rules. And you want to build a game where everybody wins. If you're creating a game that has losers, those losers will find a way to ensure that your game ends.
That's right. That is right. Amazing, amazing notes. All right, I'm going to push us towards maybe towards the end here. We've covered a lot of ground in the book so far. Obviously, not everything that we could have covered, and I wanted to leave some questions off the table for now. But towards the end of the book, Elliot, you really take my type of folks, the optimists, the folks who are building startups, working with people in the startup world, and taking ideas to impactful realities, you preach to us because you talk about how the optimists will win, that they shape the future, that pessimists might sound smart, but optimists ultimately shape what is to come. You note this idea that we need to be protopian rather than utopian or dystopian. And I think that there's something profound in that and something incredible in that, that recognizes the innovator and the truth that people in this room or people who listen to this recording, what brings them into something called even the ITT. Maybe you could spend a moment telling me, Elliot, for me, for other optimists in the room, and optimistic realists at that, why we're why we might be in shape to win here, and what does it mean to be protopian rather than utopian or dystopian?
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, we should all want to be optimists. I think probably it's a self-selecting group on this in this space. There are a lot of optimists here. The reason we should all want to be optimists is that optimists over time have proven to be more right than the pessimists. And optimists build things that last and endure and change the world. The future is not predetermined. Everything you see around you was built by an optimist
Mm,
who believed that the world could be better by them taking action. And we've all got a responsibility, a shared responsibility to create the future that we want. The the idea you see a lot right now, it's really fascinating. For the first time in since we've been taking surveys of people, just in the last decade, when you ask, is tomorrow going to be better than today? For the very first time in history of doing surveys, people are saying now that they don't believe tomorrow is going to be better than today. We
oh
have a very
wow.
pessimistic view of what's to come. Something's changed. And it's really troubling. It's worrying. The people are taking a dystopian view. They're seeing bad things. They're seeing problems around them and assuming that this means the end. And in some cases, there have always been people with pessimistic views throughout history. Always people with dystopian views. And over time, if you go back through history, those views have proven more often than not to be incorrect. It's the optimists who are more likely to be correct. And
Mm,
I want to be really careful by what I mean by optimist. Optimism is not utopianism either, thinking that the future is going to be, everything good from here on out. I define optimism as recognizing that problems are inevitable. Problems are going to continue to come our way. In fact, the problems are going to get harder to solve, but our capacity to address and solve those problems is also going to increase.
amen.
And
Mm.
that's what I mean by optimism. We're going to get better and better at solving the problems that arise.
And just a beautiful, beautiful notion. I'll go ahead and we'll end the interview on one last question and quote, from you in the book here. You say change is hard, but not changing is harder. Change is hard, but not changing is harder. Boy, do I hear that and feel that on a spiritual, physical, every level. And I get you. Um, the world is changing. We're headed in a different direction. And I think that that is abundantly true. And I think books like yours reinforce what we do here in the ITT all of the time, but also teach us incredibly new things. So I want to thank you for that. But we need to change and we need to be the change makers. And a lot of people in this room are those change makers. How can they get involved and start making an impact in this world of corporations that need to push experimentation to the outskirts, where there's 2 billion in dry powder available, where ideas are what we want at the forefront and successful entrepreneurs is what we're after? How can folks in this room or people listening to this recording on wherever they might find it, how can they get involved and start making an impact in your assessment?
Yeah, well, assuming most of the people on here are focused on building things outside of the walls of large corporations, my advice is to go uncover anomalies. Every good, compelling early stage business has a secret that they've discovered before the rest of the world has. And the way that you win, again, is by being non-consensus and proving to be right. Your job as an innovator and entrepreneur is to go discover secrets the rest of the world doesn't know yet. You do that by running as many experiments as you can, fast, cheap, and weird. Go run experiments, go uncover anomalies, go discover secrets, and then build really amazing businesses around those secrets that help shape the future and help solve problems that make people's lives better. You'll get traction.
Mr. Elliott Parker, this has been an amazing hour and a half long talk. Thank you so much for giving me 90 minutes of your time. I'm going to go ahead and just give a round of applause here. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Super fun, Josh. Appreciate the opportunity. It was really
Tons of
fun.
fun. Elliot, my question, would be do we have maybe 5 minutes to snag a couple questions from startups that are in the audience? I'll push a note to our community and say, let's make these concise, let's make them quick. But we have about 5 people requesting the mic. Maybe we take two of them. Excuse me. The first two was Dave and Tim. And Elliot, again, I want to be mindful of your time, so there would be no harm, no foul in saying, "Hey, Josh, we got to head on off now. We can move in a different direction." Or would you like to take some questions from startups here? I'll leave that up
Yeah,
to
it'd
you.
be great. I've got another 15 minutes. Yeah,
Okay,
be great.
phenomenal. Let me go ahead and get a couple of these folks on up to the top. So we have Katie, Tim, Dave, Hardistry. Hardistry, I think, is playing our music in between your segment and the next one. Emma, live Twitch, and Brandon. Let's go over to Tim. Tim, I see you have a hand up, and Dave, I know you did have a hand up during the session. I figured it would be good for us to go ahead and just, if they were still relevant at the end, we can get them asked. So, Tim, let's go your way. Good to see you in the ITT, my friend. Welcome on in to week number 82 of making this happen. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for the great Elliott Parker while we have him? Sir, Mike is yours.
Yeah, thanks for pinging me in. Elliot, nice to meet you. I'm also in venture capital. So I think it's just more kind of like encapsulating this great interview. Um, yeah, I think a lot of startups, startups are essentially innovation labs, running experiments lean. So I guess my question to you, Elliot, is in your view, how can angel investors and venture capital companies best support uh, innovation on demand?
Yeah, good question. If any of you have been involved in angel investing, that it's a wonderful thing to do. Uh, the but you want to do it right, and when you do it right, your interests align with the people who are building companies and vice versa. There's a great study a couple of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, by some professors at Stanford who looked at angel investing or venture investing. They were looking specifically at angel investing to figure out what's the best strategy if you want to invest in startups as an angel investor. What is the best way to get a return on your money? And the top strategy, after going through the records of all these angel investors, what they figured out is the very best thing you could do is take everything you own and go invest in the next Google. Like, okay, that's hard to do. It's hard to predict what the next Google is going to be. So they said the second best strategy then is to go write a bunch of small checks in as many companies as you can. And in fact, they said if you're not going to be able to invest in more than 25 companies, you shouldn't do an angel investing at all because your chance of a return is probably zero. Get back to the power law idea. So I think if you're going to be an investor, the way to help entrepreneurs and startups is actually spreading it around. A lot of small checks across a lot of companies is more likely to produce a return for you, but also more likely to enable more entrepreneurs to uncover those anomalies and secrets that lead to big outcomes for them. So that's my you can get those interests aligned in a way that where everybody wins.
Tim, great question, my friend. If you have a follow up or anything additional there, feel free to toss a hand up. We'll go your way. Uh,
Sure.
awesome. Yeah. What do you got? Any follow up?
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
absolutely, I think power law assets is very, very important in terms of just understanding that, sadly speaking, like 95 to 97% of startups fail, right? And so it's, I think, incumbent on angel investors and VCs to identify and mitigate risks, and part of that is portfolio diversification.
Yeah, that's a terrible stat, by the way. Even in VC, 9 out of 10 companies fail, and everybody accepts that like it's like, oh, it's just how it is. I think we can do
Yeah,
so
that needs
much
to
better,
change.
right? We can do so much better
Absolutely.
collectively. That's what we at
Yeah.
my
Anyways,
company, we're working on ways to try and push the power law curve and see
very
if we
good.
can get a higher success rate.
Sounds good. I just sent you a follow and also connect on LinkedIn.
Okay,
Would like to,
cool.
yeah,
Amazing. Tim, thanks for coming up on the ITT stage. Great question, my friend. Always good to see you. Let's go over to Dave Meir, who let me think it was Dave Meyer for 60 something weeks, my man. Well, that's my fault, really, at the end of that. Dave, any questions, comments, or thoughts for Elliot while we have him in the room would be welcome. Also, Dave is our next expert segment with a product launch coming up here in just a few minutes for those of you who are sticking around and interested. Dave, Mike is all yours. And unfortunately, I don't think I can hear Dave. Elliot, are you able to hear Dave?
No.
Okay, Dave, we're going to drop you down. We're going to bring you right back up for and see if that fixes it. I always say this is proof we're not in a simulation because the technology would work seamlessly if this was a simulation. My goodness. Dave, we'll bring you right back up, and that should work. All right, Mr. Muir, welcome to the stage. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for Elliott Parker? Well, we got him, sir. Mike is all yours.
I'm back. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah, I really like what you were saying about the problem with efficiency and having good managers. Really good point about the fires and stuff like that as well. And you just kind of said something about you're working on ways to kind of improve that innovation. And I think there's a problem with that. Companies are getting smaller. People are going out and trying new stuff and trying to build their own path and success, but we've been trained to be really efficient at being worker bees and following, ABC rather than having that innovative mindset. So I feel like that kind of leads into why we have such a high rate of failure. But from your point of view, what can people do to actually increase that innovation, both in the workplace and when they're starting out on their own? Because it's a very, very daunting and different place to go from working in the safe bubble that you kind of follow the instructions to having an innovative mindset. It's not, like 16 years of doing it. It's still stressful and takes a lot of patience and thinking outside the box. So how can we encourage innovation for people? I feel like we need a fundamentally mindset shift to be more innovative, to have startups that are not just I have a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you need to take a stance of assumption testing and validation is the primary way to do it. What we often do when we're starting companies, I look back at my own experience. I've started over 50 venture-backed startups now, and I feel like I've gotten better at it. I look back on some of the early companies I started 20, 25 years ago and kind of cringe at what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. And the way that that manifested itself was I'd have an idea and think it was amazing, go build a product and put it in the market and be surprised in one way or another that other people didn't see the same thing I did. And what I wasn't doing, I wasn't breaking up my idea into testable assumptions. One of the things we do now when we're launching companies is we look at the business model. If we've got an idea for a new business, there's a what we're going to provide to customers, there's the way we're going to do it, and there's the profit formula, how we're going to make money. And underneath all of those elements of the business model are assumptions. There's assumptions related to the fact that people are going to want this thing, that we can execute on it, and it's going to be worth it and make money for us to do this. And underneath that, there's hundreds of assumptions that we have varying degrees of confidence in. One of the things I've learned to do is to prioritize the assumptions that I'm going out to test. What I want to test first are those assumptions where my confidence level is low and the impact of that assumption being wrong is high. Here's what I mean by that. Like I remember once I built a business. One of the first companies I started was retail kiosks in movie theater lobbies. We were selling T-shirts and posters related to the movies that were playing. And one of the things that uh, you could have imagined building a business like that and going out and buying $1 million worth of inventory, um, setting up a bunch of kiosks and putting all the inventory out there and seeing what happens. Fortunately, that's not what we did. I was a grad student, couldn't afford $1 million inventory. If I could have, I probably would have been screwed up massively. What you want to do is test first. So maybe we do a single kiosk. Like, is that even an idea at all? What then you're testing the assumptions related to what type of inventory you want in there. You're going to then test assumptions around where you store and how you move the inventory around efficiently, what your pricing should be, all those kinds of things. And so you want to break it down into testable assumptions based on confidence level and impact. what we often do is we focus on the things that we have a high degree of confidence in, that we find easiest and most fun, and we go do those first. An example might be you want to sell something through a website. Well, you go build a you go get put the inventory in a warehouse somewhere. You then go build the website. You put the ads on Instagram or whatever, and wait for people to buy it, only to find out that nobody wants the stuff you want to sell. And there's other ways you could have tested that critical assumption first. So you gotta find ways to force yourself, I think, to avoid the temptation to do those things that you find easiest and most enjoyable. I remember another example. Once I was working with a big, massive company that makes airplanes, and they were wanting to make a commercial version of a military aircraft they had built. And they went out, and these were engineers. They designed out the commercial version of this military aircraft down to the fabrics in the seat, down to the airport connections, what these were going to look like, the stores that were going to be in there, like all sources. They spent $10 million going out and doing all this fun engineering work. And when I saw them, they laid out all the stuff on the table they had done, and all this told me how much money they had spent kind of designing this whole system for this commercial version of this military aircraft. And I said, well, which airlines did you talk to about buying these aircraft? And they said, oh yeah, yeah, we haven't done that yet. Well, no airline wanted to buy those aircraft. That was a really critical assumption, but it wasn't a fun one to go work on because the idea was going to get shot down. But it turns out their confidence level was off, and that the impact of that assumption being wrong was massive. And they should have tested that first before they went and spent $10 million doing all the other stuff like the fabric in the seats. It sounds
And
funny, but we do
Elliot,
that all the time, right?
it sounds like you're talking about it needs to be real confidence level, not false confidence level,
Yeah,
right? Like the
exactly,
degree of false
exactly.
confidence. Yeah, well
Actual
understood. Dave,
data.
what an excellent question. Dave, did you have any follow up or any additional thoughts that you wanted to share with Elliot while we had him, Dave, or do you want to pass it over to Katie?
No, I'm happy to pass it over. It's totally in line. Really appreciate it, Elliot.
Beautiful. All right, this will be our last question of the interview. Katie, good to see you up on stage. Elliot, Katie has a background being a singer, actor, a songwriter, a performer, but also an innovator, and she's come into the community recently, launching some very cool things. So great to have her on stage. Katie, I'll give you the mic. Any questions, comments, or thoughts for Elliot? And we'll try to keep it somewhat brief, just to ensure that we're being time sensitive for Dave, Elliot, and everybody in the room.
Absolutely. And thank you, Josh. Hi, Elliot. I'm Katie. Lovely to meet you. I'm founder of OWHL. And in short, we're set to revolutionize safety for all in the creative industry. So it's very exciting. And I'm excited to have been listening to what you've been sharing with the ITT and the lovely Josh and Mattia. And I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind. So, when it comes to your company and partnering, and correct me if I'm wrong, but partnering with startups, I was curious to know how you structure equity agreements. Or, is your company yourself investing in the startups that you're helping to build, or do you help startups raise capital from external investors?
Yeah, good question. Katie, nice to meet you. So we in our business, High Off Innovation, we do manage some thematic venture funds with LP partners focused on uh, specific theses that we have about investing. But most of our business is focused on company creation from scratch. So the majority of the work we do is not engaging with existing startups, is coming up with ideas and then building those companies from scratch. And so what we'll do is go out, get the idea, validate the idea, work often with a corporation in the background that's either wanting to be a first customer, distribution partner, and investor. And then we'll recruit co-founders to join that business and to go be CEO, CTO, head of product, whatever, and go run that business full time with our team in the background doing all the support they need, whether it's legal help, finance, product design, sales, on and on, including helping them raise capital through our network of venture investors. But it's focused on companies that we're co-founders in alongside those entrepreneurs that we recruit. It's a killer proposition for the entrepreneurs who come into these business. businesses, by the way. They're jumping into a startup that's got at launch $1 million, $2 million on the balance sheet. Um, Customers, it's in many cases, commercial agreements already in place, and then a whole team of supporters to help you go through the hard stuff. And with a big chunk, majority of the equity as well coming into that, which means that the corporation that's putting up most of the, if not all the investment capital in the beginning, and our team, High Alpha Innovation, we're minority owners in that business alongside the co-founding teams that come in. And the reason we do it that way is we're playing a numbers game. Uh, like I said earlier at the beginning of the call, we'll launch 12 to 15 companies this year, and we win by tripping those power law returns and launching a lot of things, and then making sure that those co-founders alongside us have every chance possible of succeeding. And that's how we shift the power law. We do a lot of vetting and proving of the ideas before we ever launch them, and then once we launch them, we support them like crazy, at every stage to make sure that they succeed.
Well, thank you very much for answering that question so eloquently. And again, it's lovely to meet you. And Josh, thank you for bringing me up as a speaker.
You
Thank
bet.
you.
Katie, always good to have you here in the ITT. Dave, Tim, Katie, people who took some time here over the last hour and a half to listen, ask questions, and folks who put them in the bottom right hand corner who we were not able to get to. My apologies. But thank you for joining us. And Elliot, on behalf of the entire community, thank you for taking some time to come on in and talk to us about not only your book, but digging back on some of the layers there and talking to us about some of your thinking about how innovators in this room, small teams in this room, have an edge unlike ever before, and how things might be changing to accommodate that edge. Sir, it's been really great to meet you. I listened, to you talk in your audiobook, so it felt like I had listened to you, a lot, and then this is the first time you're chatting with me. So I just wanted to, on behalf of everybody in the room, our whole community, thank you for taking time for us today. Is there anything that you might want to share with us? Any places that innovators can catch you speaking, doing work, or anything you might want to share? We'd love to give you that mic.
Super fun. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. And here on X, a great way to engage with me. And I just, all of you who are out there building things, I admire you so much. The world needs more entrepreneurs, more builders, and the world needs more of us, and more of you to succeed. So best of luck in creating the future. I am rooting for you and want you to win.
Lord knows they would have clapped, Elliot, if if their hands, if we're not black screens. We're all holding phones here, but certainly real amazing people on the other end of each and every one of those profile pictures, building important things, especially to them. So, Elliot, thank you so much, my friend. We're gonna make a pivot. We'll start heading towards our next expert, guys. I'm gonna do a recap of the ITT of what we're doing here, our agenda. Take a moment while we have him up on the stage still to follow Elliott Parker. Be